Welcome, everyone. Really excited to have you here today. If you have been at other coffee break webinars before, then you know that we're using a slightly different platform. So I have a little bit of learning, which is very appropriate talking about growth mindset. But anyways, so we'll get started now. So welcome to our next installation of our coffee break webinar series, Change Your Mind, Change Your Project, Adopting a Growth Mindset for Annual Reporting. So before we get into the heart of our conversation for today, I want to take a few minutes and really set the context for why we're having this conversation. So you may or may not be familiar with growth mindset. And growth mindset basically is the idea or the belief that personal attributes, intelligence, abilities, and talent can change through effort. And that can be contrasted against a fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset, you believe that those types of personal attributes are not really changeable. Now, at first blush, you may think that your growth mindset, but the reality is we really live in a fixed mindset world. For example, if you've ever heard anyone say, I'm not a people person, or I'm not good at math, those are kind of the language of a fixed mindset person. Whereas if you've heard someone say, I'm not a people person yet, or I'm not good at math yet, that's more of the language of growth mindset. Over the past few decades, there has been a marked increased interest in growth mindset. And one piece of evidence of this comes from searching ProQuest. ProQuest is a comprehensive database for scholarly artifacts. So in looking at ProQuest, starting in 1993 in a 5-year span, there were just slightly over 7,000 artifacts related somehow to growth mindset. Looking within the most recent 5-year time frame ending in 2022, that exploded to almost over 300,000 artifacts. So that leads to the question of why is there so much interest in growth mindset? And that has a lot to do with what researchers are finding about this topic. In regards to openness to information about abilities, we find that individuals who are in a growth mindset tend to be much higher than those who are in a fixed mindset. Relevant to accuracy about one's abilities, again, people who are a growth mindset tend to be more interested in that than those who are in a fixed mindset. In regards to engagement and goal-directed behavior, again, those who are in growth mindset will actually take steps in the actions that are consistent with their goals versus those who are in the fixed mindset. And it has consequences of other areas as well. So response to challenges, growth mindset individuals tend to persist. In terms of academic achievement, growth mindset individuals tend to increase in terms of academic achievement, whereas fixed mindset individuals, one may stay stagnant or decrease. And then also we see that again in terms of willingness to take on challenges with those in growth mindset who are much more willing to embrace challenges than those who are in a fixed mindset. So Carol Dwek, who is a leading researcher in growth mindset, provides these kind of summary of growth mindset that really started, from my standpoint, making me think about the relevance of this topic, of this field within grant-funded work. And the way that she summarizes this, she says, if you have only a certain amount of intelligence, a certain personality, and a certain moral character, well, then you better prove that you have a healthy dose of it. I've seen so many people with this one consuming goal of proving themselves in the classroom, in their careers, and in their relationships. And she also says, why waste time proving over and over how great you are when you could be getting better? That is learning. Why hide deficiencies instead of overcoming them? Well, all of that really had a lot of meaning to me about this proving and improving. If you've been around our coffee break webinar series at all, you've heard us before talk about this idea of proving and improving. And the origins around this idea of improving and proving comes from the book, The Score Takes Care of Itself, written by Bill Walsh, who is basically the coach that put the 49ers on the map. And what he suggests is that instead of focusing on the score or focusing on proving, focusing on the outcomes, if you focus in on everything around that, if you focus in on the things that will achieve the proving by improving, then in his case, the score takes care of itself. In our case, we say by focusing on improving, then what you're trying to achieve with their goals will take care of itself. And it's because of this overlap between growth mindset and grant-funded work that we thought that we would be able to go to the growth mindset research and pull in some best practices, some information for understanding that may help project teams with their grants, and in particular, in talking about annual reporting. So what we want to do today are really three things. First, we want to be able to give a background on why this topic is important. Second, we wanted to be able to discuss how a growth and fixed mindset may reveal itself within grant-funded work. And then finally, we also want to be able to offer suggestions on how to cue a growth mindset in the reporting process. But before we get started, I should introduce myself. I'm Lana Rux, Principal Consultant of the Rux Group. And the Rux Group is a research and program evaluation firm that gathers, analyzes, and interprets data to enable our clients to measure the impact of their work. And so for the past 15 years, and yes, we're celebrating our 15th anniversary this year, we've had the privilege of working with a number of different entities, primarily higher ed institutions on federal grant-funded work from institutions across the country. So with me today as well is Elise Hopes. And so I'll turn things over to her for her to be able to share what her role is on this webinar today. Elise?
Yeah, thank you, Lana. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elise Hopes, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator with the Rux Group. For today's webinar, I'll be helping to moderate the Q&A portions that occur throughout the webinar. So as you may have questions emerge that you'd like us to answer through the webinar, feel free to use that question function that appears at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer those questions at each of those Q&A segments, and anything that we don't get to, we'll be sure to follow up in email. There's also a chat feature, which I may use to communicate with you all in case you want to share additional resources and other materials that are relevant to today's topic. So I think those are all my updates, Lana. So I think we're good to go ahead and get started.
All right, fabulous. Well, let's go ahead and start talking about why mindsets matter. So we talked a little bit in the intro about what we're learning from the growth mindset research. And there's something else that we're learning as well. And one of the aspects of growth mindset or fixed mindset that we're learning is that they create meaning systems. Dwek and her colleague refers to these meaning systems in this way. They argue that some beliefs are not isolated ideas, but rather can serve an organizing function. Another researcher who's written a popular book called Success Mindsets phrases it this way. He says that mindsets become a lens we use to interpret the world. So to get an understanding of what we're talking about in terms of these meaning systems and a lens, I want to try an exercise. I've done this in person. We're going to try this virtually as well. So on the next page, I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to try to count as many items that are yellow in 10 seconds, as many items that are in yellow in 10 seconds. All right, so I'm going to flip to the picture. I'm going to give you 10 seconds, and I want you to count how many items that you can find that are yellow. So let's go. All right. So do you have all the items that you've counted? Do you know all the items in the room that are in yellow? All right, well then I want you to tell me how many items that you can find in that room, or how many items that you can recall that are green. And if you are like most people, when they've done this before, you can barely remember anything in that room that is green. And so let's look at this room again. You can remember the yellow items, but there were actually a lot of green items. And what this exercise is attempting to be able to illustrate is the idea that there's a lot of stimuli that we're exposed to in our worlds, but we tend to focus in on and we tend to see the things where our minds are actually focused. And that has a lot to do with what types of frameworks that we're operating from, whether that's growth or whether that's a fixed mindset. So now let's kind of see another example of this in terms of what this means in terms of our work. So let's think about this. When I talked about a fixed mindset, I said that the definition of a fixed mindset is that you should already have the abilities now. And if you work hard, and if you work too hard, then maybe you're really not that great. And so it would make sense that you don't want to have information about your abilities. You want to make sure that you're pushing off the information about your ability. And so if you're in a growth mindset and you're thinking, well, no, I may not have all the abilities right now, but that's okay because I can learn and develop them, then I want to have accurate information. I want to know where I am and I want to understand how can I get better. So those two different types of mindsets have different behavioral consequences. In one case, you're going to push back, and the other one, you're going to be much more active and moving towards a goal. And what we all know from the research as well is that there's actual neural correlates to all of that as well. Some early research in fixed and growth mindset show that when you're in a fixed mindset, that the activities, the portions of the brain involved in problem solving are not as active as it is when you're in the growth mindset. So it's actually really difficult to problem solve if you're really in the fixed mindset. And that leads Dwek to say this. She says that believing that success is about learning, individuals with a growth mindset seize the change, but those with a fixed mindset don't want to expose their deficiencies. This is how fixed mindset makes people into non-learners. So before we start to take all that information and start translating that to grants, let me just pause to see if there are any questions. Elise?
Yeah, we do have a question. Are mindsets really all one way or the other?
I would assume kind of in terms of, do you have a fixed mindset or you don't have a fixed mindset, or it could be fixed or growth. And I don't think that it's really that you're always in a fixed mindset or you're always in a growth mindset. Growth and fixed mindsets definitely on a continuum. There are definitely some situations that will cue out a growth mindset more than other situations. High pressure situations may cue that out, depending on where we're around. The academy, I think, sometimes may kind of cue fixed mindset. So no, I don't think that it's necessarily one way or the other. And I don't think the researchers and the scholars would support that either, but we're on a continuum. I would say that we probably have what's called a center of gravity, which would be where our tendencies are and how we see the world and how we interpret the world. And that's one of the places where we probably need to work and get better at to be more growth-minded oriented. So really great question. I'm going to go on, and as we have time towards the end, we'll allow for additional questions. So now let's talk about fixed mindset and behaviors and how this actually starts to translate over to grant-funded work. We've had several different webinars in the past, really talking about annual reporting, and April. About 2 years ago, we had Get a Grip. Last year, we had the privilege of having Dr. Yvette Pearson, who is an evaluator, program officer, and principal investigator, talk about the entire kind of annual reporting process. And we talk about this a lot because we've seen challenges and the dread that project teams sometimes have in annual reporting. And so what I want to do next is talk about some behaviors that occur throughout the year that will ultimately lead to making the annual reporting process very challenging, and show how they're really indicative of fixed mindset, and give a little bit of a prelude of how a growth mindset would see those challenges or see those situations a little bit differently or have a different response. So one that we've seen in terms of behaviors is that sometimes project teams will begin to avoid challenges. And if you've been in the grant funding space at all, you know that you're going to encounter some challenges. You've had a hypothesis on how the project is going to be implemented, and it just very often doesn't go that way. The partnerships that you thought you were going to have didn't pan out the way that they're actually panning out. There's more red tape, more bureaucracy than what you expected, what have you. And so you could either lean into those challenges or you can pull out. And if you pull out from those challenges, one of the consequences that we've seen is that you reduce the amount of time that you have to identify and implement remedies. So in a grant, you only have 3 years to implement and to achieve what you're what you've set out to achieve. And so that if you start procrastinating and don't deal with the challenges as quickly as possible, you start reducing the amount of time to be able to actually implement remedies and implement solutions. So that can really become problematic with a grant. Another challenge that we've seen is in terms of ghosting team members. And this is when you're not reaching out, you're not following up, you're not like communicating to people who are on the team. And that could be the complete team or the evaluator. And sometimes that happens, you could say from a really noble place, there's nothing going on, I have nothing to report, and I don't want to bother you. But one of the challenges with that is that it creates missed opportunities in terms of leveraging other minds to solve problems, leveraging other minds to either solve problems or see additional opportunities and additional ways that a grant could be fully implemented and the goal could even be achieved in a much larger way. Another piece that we've seen too is just in regards to minimizing the continuous learning process, not really taking in information, not understanding that data should be collected on an ongoing basis to help with the learning process. And what happens is you're really kind of pushing out critical data that may illuminate solutions, or again, just illuminate additional opportunities that could be leveraged through the grant. And then finally, another piece is just in terms of magnifying positives and trivializing negatives, that the positives are really, really great and the negatives are really, really small. And what happens as a consequence of that is that you don't really have an accurate assessment of where things are. And if you don't have an accurate assessment of where things are, it makes it really difficult to figure out what the next steps are, figure out who do you need to bring in to help to move that grant along to the next level. So you take all these pieces and you add them up. You take avoiding challenges, ghosting team members, minimizing continuous learning, magnifying positives and trivializing negatives, and it really leads to a certain level of angst. And part of that angst is now you have like almost a reckoning of having to explain what has occurred in the grant, and it's really difficult trying to engage in that activity. And so this is partly why teams can feel the impact of these outcomes working on the annual report. And the more that you don't engage in these behaviors, that you're not avoiding, you're not ghosting individuals, that you're actually bringing individuals in and helping them the problem solving, helping with continuous learning, and really understanding where you are with the project, the more you do that, the angst around annual reporting will be reduced. So let me pause there and see if there are any additional questions.
There is an additional question. How do you get yourself to see things differently or to have a different lens?
That's a really good question. And I think that it's deliberate to put a different spin on what you're looking at. So for instance, I'm almost reminded of the famous quotation to Thomas Edison. He said that before he learned how to invent a light bulb, he learned 1,000 different ways in which it didn't work. And I think that's one way of understanding or interpreting. Let's say you're trying to recruit out students. You know that what you initially are doing, that it's not working. But use that approach isn't working, and you've learned that. So I think probably at the heart of it is really framing things around this learning standpoint. What are you learning? The other pieces too that I found is that sometimes, even if you look at mean effects, if you look at like the broad numbers, like we're not recruiting as many students as we think that we were going to recruit, or the intervention isn't having the impact that we thought the intervention was going to have, there's usually a subgroup in which it's working really well. And I don't work with the data quite as much as I used to, but I used to love getting to, okay, I see the mean effects, it's not working, but where is it working? And understanding and really trying to understand things at a conceptual level so that can be applied across the grant. So I guess at the heart of it is understanding that you've learned what isn't working, and as a consequence of knowing what's not working, you start to learn what actually is working. And that is fundamentally just really a deliberate process. So I'll go on and I'll go through the last segment, and then we'll see if we have time for additional questions at that point. So I've started talking about this already, but do you want to have a targeted conversation on how to increase the growth mindset? I guess that was really related to the question that was just asked as well. I will say again that I would reference some of the previous webinars that we've had. I think these are great resources, but I would also highlight another one that's actually more focused on the grant proposal writing process called Don't Tell Me I Have to Write That, for some additional technical skills and some technical tips on how to help with annual reporting. So the tips that I want to provide now are much more related to a kind of the cognitive emotional perspective. And again, it relates to the question that was just asked. So here are some other tips. One, understand what your fixed mindset triggers are. As I said before, we're not all fixed. We're not all growth, but sometimes there are things that can trigger one type of mindset versus another type of mindset. And understand what those triggers are, and understand and catch yourself too when you're in that mindset. The other suggestion that I would provide as well is that if you have a challenge, that really sit with that challenge, even if the remedies are unclear. I know I'm very guilty of this. Sometimes I feel like I have to start working out the solutions in my head, and then I'm going to go take action. And then I go, but I can't even come up with a solution at all. And what I've learned and what I'm reading in the literature as well is that you just approach it, just create space and just think about one potential next step that you can take instead of just not taking any action. I think this really relates to this, is that build a team with diverse perspectives and make sure that you're building a team as well. other people will bring to you some thoughts and some ideas, and that will help with that idea generation process. Another piece as well is that you really want to make sure that you create project level structure. And you want to make sure that you have structure to your project. So you want to make sure that you're having regular team meetings. You want to make sure that there are ways in which you're getting feedback and you're providing feedback to others. And the reason for that is then if you just have that as part of your structure, then you don't feel as though you have to have really grand updates for calling a meeting. It's just a regular monthly meeting time point. And then finally, I think it's really key is that you really want to make sure that you have people within your space that understand grant funded work, that you feel safe with, that you can share your struggles with. And then that person can really be a thought partner with you to help you to strategize. So with that, let me just quickly see if there is another question.
Yeah, we do have one more. This one's actually more of a comment, it looks like, but with grant funds, there seems like there's a lot of pressure. And so it feels a little irresponsible to not carry that weight and to focus on learning.
I think I understand what the person is saying. So essentially, that this is really serious. You may have like $500,000 or $1 million of federal funds. And so you really want to be very serious about the activity and the trust that's been placed in you. And I think my response or my comment back to the comment would be that taking a learning perspective is not taking things seriously. And if what we know from the literature, it's going to actually make you able to perform better, then that should be a strategy that you incorporate. And that means that there's a win-win. It will make you feel less stressful. It will make you feel more empowered, will make you overall just feel better, and it will make you perform on the grant better. So because it's so serious, because it's so important, it's even more of a reason for you to make sure that you're trying to incorporate a growth mindset and a learning perspective. So those are my 2 cents comments back to that. So it's hard to believe we only have a minute left. So let me just kind of summarize what we've talked about already. So one, we've learned that mindsets create a lens in which we interpret data. We learned that a growth mindset will help us to approach the challenges that we are experiencing, and that we need to intentionally strive for a growth mindset. So with that, we don't have time for another Q&A. So join us in November, where we are going to be talking about working together, identifying, cultivating, and assessing partner involvement. So thank you so much again for joining us today, and hope to see you soon. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. So have a great rest of your Thursday.